dock is primarily used as transient docking for people who are trying to move their boats up and down the East Coast. They can stop over there at the Maritime Center for a day, a week, or maybe longer, check out the city of Charleston, and then get back on their boats and continue their journeys up and down the East Coast of the U.S. So Charleston is known as the Holy City, and we have many church steeples in town here. I'm going to go over a few of the more historic ones with you. These are all going to be located off the right side of the boat. So first we are going to talk about that tall brown church steeple that is off to our right over there. That is St. Philip's Episcopal Church, and that is the oldest congregation here in South Carolina. The original church was built here in Charleston way back in 1681, and unfortunately that church came to fire, so the current church you are looking at right now was built there in 1838. The original church bells for that church were melted down and used as Confederate cannons during the Civil War. And then later on in the Civil War, when the Union Army and Navy was attempting to retake the city of Charleston, they used that church steeple as a reference point for aiming their cannons. And that was one of the first times in military history where a compass was used for aiming at a target. Now, to the left of that tall brown church steeple, we have a shorter white church steeple. It's kind of going behind our U.S. Customs House right now, but you're going to get a little bit better view of it here in about 30 seconds or so. That is St. Michael's Episcopal Church, and that is the oldest church building that has been in continuous use here in Charleston. That church was completed in 1761, and it has survived many natural disasters, including hurricanes, fires, tornadoes, and even a major earthquake in 1886. But that earthquake in 1886 did leave that church steeple leaning about 4 degrees over to the right. So as we get a little more perpendicular with that church steeple, you might be able to see how it's leaning about 4 degrees over to the right. George Washington and Robert E. Lee have attended services over there at St. Michael's, and St. Michael's is located on the corner of Broad and Meeting Streets, and locally that area is known as the Four Corners of Law, and that's because down there we have a federal building, a state courthouse, City Hall, and then St. Michael's, which represents God's law. So it's said that if you go down there, you can get your mail, get married, get divorced, and go to jail, all in the same location. Right off to our right over here, this is Union Pier. This is home to our cruise ship terminal. We are aware of just how ugly this is, and there are plans to renovate this and get rid of some of these older warehouses. The cruise ships are due to come back to Charleston and start leaving out of the port of Charleston around Labor Day weekend, so we are looking forward to having that industry back here. Normally the cruise ships dock all the way towards the end of this pier where you see that blue tarp covering part of the building there, and it looks like it's a little bit more of a modern two-story building. Usually we have Carnival Cruise Lines. They do 2 cruises a week out of the port of Charleston. It's usually 5- and 7-day cruises down to Bermuda, the Bahamas, and a few other locations in the Caribbean. Now, behind that newer cruise ship terminal, we have a building with columns back there, Roman Revival architecture, and kind of a peak roof. That is our U.S. Customs House. And construction on that Customs House began back in 1849. It took 30 years to complete, and there are 2 reasons it took so long to finish that Customs House. The first reason is that they had to stop construction during the Civil War, and then the second reason it took so long is that it took 19 separate acts of Congress to get all the funding passed for that building. So that shows you that not a lot has really changed with Congress over all these years. Now, more than likely, they are trying to throw some sort of pre-fireworks party over there at the cruise ship terminal today, which is probably where that loud music is coming from. Alrighty guys, so the next thing we are going to talk about here is this pier that's right off to our right with the white flagpole, the 3 white roof gazebo buildings. This is the Mayor Joe Riley Waterfront Park. Joe Riley was our mayor from 1975 all the way up to 2015, some 40 years as our mayor. So upon his retirement, the city council voted unanimously to rename this park in his honor. There are 2 ground level fountains in the park. There is one there right behind those 3 white roof gazebo buildings. That's a good one for the kids to run through on hot summer days like today to kind of cool themselves off while you're touring the city of Charleston. And then about 50 yards to the left of that fountain, we have the famous pineapple fountain of Charleston, which is in this gap between the palm trees or palmetto trees here. The pineapple is a symbol of hospitality here in Charleston, and the way the pineapple became a symbol of hospitality is back in olden days when ship's captains would go out, they would try to gather up pineapples on their journey simply because it was kind of difficult to come by a pineapple here in Charleston. And once they were home and well rested, they would put that pineapple out on their front porch, and that would signify to the local townspeople that it was okay to come over and discuss the captain's voyages and partake in the pineapple. And Charleston has been voted the friendliest city in the U.S. for the last 20 years, It's also been voted the #1 destination to visit in the United States for the last 9 years. And those are two things we are very proud of. Next thing we're going to talk about is this white cupola with a gray top roof on it right here, and it's kind of getting ready to pass in front of St. Michael's Cathedral. That is the old Exchange Provost Dungeon building. That's the last public building that was built by the British, and that was completed in 1771. Originally that served as a jail. They jailed up some of our early Revolutionary War fighters there when the British first occupied the city early during the Revolutionary War. And then later on it became a post office, then it was a bank. During World War II that was our Coast Guard station. Today it's a museum, and you can go in there and see the original dungeons that the British built, and you can also see part of Charleston's original wall. Charleston was one of 3 walled cities in North America. The other 2 are St. Augustine and Quebec City. Next, off to our right here, we have these gray boats docked up over here. These are the Charleston Harbor pilot boats. And what these guys do is anytime a large container ship comes in our harbor, these guys will go about 15 miles offshore, meet up with that ship. One of the crew members will jump off that small gray boat and onto the big container ship and then make their way up towards the wheelhouse. But they don't actually have to drive those big container ships. They just tell the captains of those ships how they want it driven so that they can successfully navigate through our harbor. And this is a really prized job in the area, and that's because no container ship can enter our harbor without a pilot captain on board. So these guys are able to command an incredibly high salary. They usually get paid between $500,000 and $700,000 a year to tell someone else how to drive a boat. So unless you're related to someone who works there, or you marry into one of the families that works at the Charleston pilot boats, the chance of you getting a job there are just about 0. Now after that we have the smaller marina with this nice double-masted sailboat with all the flags on it. This is the Carolina Marina and Yacht Club. This was one of the more older and prestigious yacht clubs in the area. It's first established in 1883. There is currently a 25-year waiting list to get in there, but I do hear if you're willing to make a $125,000 donation to them that they will bump you up on that list just a little bit. Alright, so the next thing we have, guys, beyond the marina here is the all these homes going down towards the point of the Charleston Peninsula. That area is known as Battery Row. That's some of the more expensive real estate in the downtown area. Those homes were initially built by ship's captains, merchants, and plantation owners. You can tell the ship's captains' homes because they have those nice big wraparound porches on them. Those are referred to as widows' walks, and that's because the wives of these captains would wander around those porches looking for their husband's hopeful safe return from sea. All the other porches out there generally face out towards the southeast, and that's because in the summertime here we have an incredibly reliable southeastern sea breeze, so that served as an early form of air conditioning for our first residents in the area. Now further down on the tip of the peninsula there we have all those nice live oak trees. That area is known as White Point Gardens, or the Battery. They first started calling that White Point Gardens because when the first settlers showed up here, they noticed that the local Native Americans were discarding their oyster shells there, and then the sun was bleaching those shells white. So they called the area White Point Gardens. It later became known as the Battery for the battery of cannons that was placed there, starting in the Revolutionary War, through the Civil War, and on up into World War II. And that's also one of the places where they used to hang pirates, but we're going to talk a little bit more about pirates in just a few minutes. So right now we are in the Cooper River. Off to our right is the Ashley River, and both of these rivers are named after the same person, Lord Ashley Cooper. He was one of the first Lord proprietors that King Charles II of England had sent here to settle this whole area. And I guess one of the advantages of being one of the first people in charge in a location is you get to name a bunch of stuff after yourself. So that's exactly what he did. He named the Ashley River off to our right after his first name, and the Cooper River that we are in right now after his last name. Now, back in 2020, Charleston was celebrating its 350th anniversary. Although with all the COVID stuff going on, we weren't doing that much celebrating. But that does mean that the first settlers showed up here back in 1670. And they sailed up here on 2 ships. One of those ships was called the Carolina, and they went about 2 miles up the Ashley River to the first high ground, and they named that area Albemarle Point. And then about a year or so later, King Charles II of England gave them permission to start construction in the downtown area. This was a planned community, so within about 10 years, there were over 100 homes built in the downtown area. And they decided to name that area Charlestown, 2 words, after King Charles II of England. And then after we won the Revolutionary War, I guess our renaming committee wasn't all too creative, but they decided they wanted to change the name of the city, but all they really did was make it 1 word, take 1 letter out of the name, and call it Charlestown. And that's how the city ended up with its name. So we were talking about pirates a little bit earlier. Early on, we actually had a pretty good relationship with the pirates, like in the late 1600s, and that's because we weren't exporting anything yet, we were just importing. So these pirates were stealing from the British and then selling those goods back to us without any of the taxes or tariffs that the British would have imposed. But eventually, we started exporting a lot of goods out of the Charleston Harbor, especially as we started moving into the early 1700s. And because they're pirates and they're greedy, they started stealing from us also. And in 1 month here in the 1720s, the local governors got so fed up with all the piracy that was going on in the area that after they captured 40 pirates, they hung them all down there at White Point Gardens. This was not a pleasant sight to witness, obviously. They would usually leave them hanging up on those gallows for up to a week. And then when they did finally cut them down, they would throw them into the mud face down at low tide. And that terrified the pirates because they were worried if they were buried that way that their soul would exit their body in the wrong direction. Now, we did have some famous pirates that operated around this area. One of them was a person by the name of Steve Bonnet. He's known as the Gentleman Pirate, and that's because he was born into a wealthy family. He actually had a somewhat successful business, and then I guess he had a midlife crisis because he decided to ditch his wife and kids and become a pirate. And now Steve Bonnet was a little bit different than your average pirate. Most pirates, when they wanted a pirate ship, they would steal someone else's ship and then use that as their pirate ship. But because Steve Bonnet had money and he was wealthy, he actually bought both of his ships legally and then converted them into pirate ships. And like a lot of guys who buy a new boat for the first time, he was not too good out there on the water. He kept running into docks, running into other people, running into sandbars. And it wasn't really until he teamed up with a more famous pirate named Blackbeard that he became successful. And Blackbeard and Steve Bonnet worked together for about 2 years. They pillaged a lot of ships all the way from Delaware Bay down to Florida and out into the Caribbean. The most famous thing those two guys did together, locally here at least, was that they blockaded the Charleston Harbor for 6 days in June of 1718. They had 4 ships between them. They blockaded the whole harbor. Any ship that would try to come in or out, they would instantly attack and raid. And their only demand to stop blockading the Charleston Harbor was that they receive a chest of medicine from the local city government. I guess the life of a pirate was filled with a lot of disease and injuries. So after 6 days, the city of Charleston relented, sent out that chest of medicine to them, and then those pirates actually honored the agreement, and after they got that medicine, they sailed away. Now, about 2 months after that, I guess Blackbeard got sick of dealing with Steve Bonnet, didn't want to teach him how to become a successful boat operator and share his loot with him, because he ended up stealing one of Steve Bonnet's ship and about 30 of his men, and then he took off and hid out down towards the Caribbean area. And Steve Bonnet wanted to go looking for him, but he got a false report that Blackbeard was hiding out with his stolen ship up in the Cape Fear River in North Carolina. So that's where he went looking for him. And when he got up to the Cape Fear River, instead of finding Blackbeard, he found a famous British pirate hunter named William Rhett. They got involved in a battle up there known as the Battle of the Sandbars, and William Rhett was able to easily capture Steve Bonnet and his remaining ship. They turned Steve Bonnet into the local governorship here in Charleston, and he was one of the pirates hung there at White Point Gardens back in December of 1718. All right, folks, we do like to do a little bit of trivia while we are navigating around the harbor today, so we are going to ask a few trivia questions as we navigate around the harbor today. If you think you have the right answer to any of my trivia questions, you can come to the wheelhouse and let me know. If you do have the right answer, that'll get you a free non-alcoholic drink or a snack from the Bell Cafe. You are welcome to cheat on my trivia questions like a pirate if you want. You can use Google, or you can use Siri, or maybe if you're lucky enough you're sitting next to a Patriots or an Astros fan, they're very well versed with different methods of cheating. They might be able to help you out a little bit today. So since we were just talking about pirates, our first question will be pirate related. If anyone can tell me what Alright, if anyone can tell me what Blackbeard's real name is, that will get you a free non-alcoholic drink or a snack from the Bell Cafe. Alrighty, so our man Christopher got our first trivia question. It was Edward Teach is Blackbeard's real name, so he can get himself a free non-alcoholic drink or a snack from the Bell Cafe. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is talk about agriculture here in the South. Everyone always thinks about cotton and tobacco when they think of the South, and that is for good reason. They were very big products in this area, and by the mid-1800s, Charleston was the leading exporter of cotton and tobacco on the entire East Coast. But it was actually rice that made the early plantation owners here very wealthy. These plantation owners had brought over enslaved West Africans who were experts in growing this very tasty rice. And they started naming this rice Carolina Gold Rice, and they called it that for how good the rice tasted, and probably also for how much money was making those early plantation owners. And rice was big here all the way up through till the end of the Civil War, and then rice fell out of favor for 2 reasons at the end of the Civil War. The first reason is obvious, which is that they lost their free labor source at the end of the Civil War. And then the second reason that rice fell out of favor is because we had 2 hurricanes that came through this area towards the end of the Civil War, and both of the hurricanes had such a big storm surge that they flooded out the rice paddies with salt water, so that ended up killing off the rice crop here for many, many years. And it actually hasn't been until recently, like within the last 20 years, that we've had some local farmers, growers, and restaurateurs attempt to regrow this rice. And they have been somewhat successful. So once again, you can find Carolina Gold rice in some of our nicer restaurants and in some of our area supermarkets. Now, off to our right, guys, that piece of land over there is James Island. And James Island wasn't famous for growing rice, cotton, or tobacco. They were famous for growing indigo over there. And it was the Lucas family from Barbados that started one of the earliest successful indigo plantations over there on James Island. And when you process the indigo plant, you get a very cool color dye. Kind of that deep blue color, or the color indigo. And this is how South Carolina got the color for its state flag. It's from the indigo plantations that used to be located off to our right over there on James Island. That indigo product has been prized for thousands and thousands of years. Now, closer to us and off to our right, you can see a tugboat next to a barge over here. This is a staging area for some of the dredging that they are doing around the harbor. So this is a dredging barge. So they will fill up that dredging barge, and once that's full, they take it about 15 miles offshore, dump all the dredging material out, and then bring it back in. You are going to see possibly, sometimes they shut down for a holiday, but usually the dredging is 24/7, so more than likely we will go by some active dredging today. Alrighty folks, so now we're going to do our second trivia question. This one's going to sound real easy, but this is actually our most difficult trivia question, and even when people try to cheat on this one, they do not always get it right. But I'm going to ask you where the first shot of the Civil War was fired from, and I will give you two hints. Number one, it is not Fort Sumter. I repeat, it is not Fort Sumter. And the second hint is the fort that actually did fire the first shot of the Civil War used to be located on this point of land that's out in front of the boat. So I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to think about that. And then once we get a little bit closer to this point of land, I'll tell you about the fort that used to be located there and what's located there right now. Alrighty folks, so we had someone get the right answer. It was Fort Johnson that actually fired the first shot of the Civil War, and that was due to Sam, who's sitting off to our right over here, so he can get himself a free non-alcoholic drink or a snack from the Bell Cafe if he wants. Alrighty folks, so over here to our right is where Fort Johnson used to be located at. Fort Johnson construction began in 1701. It was completed by about 1708, making it one of the earlier forts in the area, and it was named after a local governor who was in charge of the area at the time. Now, Fort Johnson was active through the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, but after the Civil War, they tore down almost all of Fort Johnson, so there is not that much of it to see over here anymore. There is a little bit of a reserve powder magazine, but I would not put this location off to our right on places you want to come visit if you're looking to check out historical forts while you're in the area. Now, if you're into marine biology, then this place off to our right might interest you a lot right now, because what's over there right now is we have the College of Charleston's Bryce Marine Laboratory, and we also have NOAA and the Department of Natural Resources that have research vessels over there. So there is a lot of important marine research being conducted on that point of land off to our right where Fort Johnson used to be located at. Alrighty folks, so the next thing we're going to look at, this is going to be the furthest thing away from the boat that we look at today, but this is going to be about 2 to 3 miles off to the right side of the boat over the far tree line. You are going to see a little lighthouse popping up over that far tree line, and that is the Morris Island Lighthouse way over there. And there has been an aid to navigation out there since 1673. Now that first aid to navigation really wasn't much of a lighthouse at all. It was just a raised pan that was filled with pitch and tar, and it would be set on fire on nights where they knew boats were trying to maneuver in or around the harbor. The first actual lighthouse that was built way over there was back in 1767, and it was 42 feet tall. And that lasted for about 70 years, and then in 1837 they decided they wanted a taller lighthouse, so they built one that was 102 feet tall. But that lighthouse only lasted for about 25 years. And that's because as we got into the heart of the Civil War, the local Confederate troops realized that the Union Army or Navy might capture that lighthouse and then use it as a lookout, so they intentionally blew it up. So the lighthouse you're looking at way over there right now was built in 1876. It is 161 feet tall, and it was in service all the way up until 1962. And when they first built that Morris Island Lighthouse, it was sitting 1/4 mile inland on Morris Island. But if you were to go check out that lighthouse today, you would see that it is sitting 1/4 mile out in the open Atlantic Ocean. And that is due to the erosion that is happening on Morris Island. And a lot of that erosion is due to the installation of the Charleston jetties. Now, luckily we have some local state and city community groups that are trying to preserve the lighthouse, and they have been somewhat successful now. They've built a cofferdam around the base along with some additional bulkheading, but this is an ongoing effort. Now, if you wanted to see that lighthouse up close, you would have to take a boat all the way out there, or you could drive out to Folly Beach. And if you go out to the extreme northeastern end of Folly Beach where the road ends, then there's another asphalt path that leads about another 1/4 to a 1/2 mile out to a beach. And right off that beach is the Morris Island Lighthouse. So for any of you guys staying in the Folly Beach area, that can be a nice little 1/4 or 1/2 day trip just to kind of go down there, hike out to that beach, go swimming around there for a little bit, get some pictures of the lighthouse. Alrighty folks, so the next thing we're going to talk about is Fort Sumter, which is kind of out in front of us and off to our right. Fort Sumter is named after a General Thomas Sumter, who was a local Revolutionary War hero, but he also had a pretty cool nickname. So for what will probably be our final trivia question of the day here, if anyone can come up with General Thomas Sumter's nickname, that too will get you a free non-alcoholic drink or a snack from the Bell Cafe. Alright, so back in 1829, they decided they wanted to try to build a fort out in this location. At that point, there was just a little sandbar that would show up here at low tide. All this land that you see off to our right that looks like it's connecting to Fort Sumter was not here back then. This land off to our right has actually shown up to here somewhat recently, like since the 1940s. And that's because when they started dredging the harbor, they used to dump the dredge material over here off to our right. So this was all man-made island off to our right since the 1940s. Now back in 1829, they bought about 75,000 tons of granite down from New England and started forming the base of the fort, and then they started building the fort on top of that. And this was a really laborious process, trying to build a fort on a tiny man-made island out here in the center of the harbor. And by December of 1860, this fort was about 90% complete. It was 3 stories high, in the shape of a pentagon, and it can hold around 400 to 500 soldiers. But also in December of 1860, that is when South Carolina decided to secede from the Union. So at that time, the local militias, Confederate troops, and even cadets from our local military school took over all the other forts in the area, except for the Union-controlled Fort Sumter. Now, at that time, there was a Major Robert Anderson and 83 of his men occupying Fort Sumter. These Confederate troops went out there and they asked him if he would kindly surrender the fort, but he had to refuse because he had been ordered to stay put. And at that time, newly installed President Jefferson Davis of the South had only been in office for about a week or so. He was not quite yet ready to start the Civil War right off the bat. So he instead decided on a strategy of trying to starve the troops out of Fort Sumter by not allowing the fort to be resupplied. And this was actually starting to work pretty effectively as we got into April of 1861. Food supplies were running really low out there at the fort. So at that time, newly elected President Lincoln decided he was going to try to send down a resupply ship called Star of the West. This was an unarmed vessel that did not have a military escort. So when that vessel got about a mile or two away from Fort Sumter, Confederate troops over at Fort Moultrie and Morris Island signaled to that vessel to please turn around. And then they fired a single warning shot in its general vicinity just to let them know they meant business. So that boat was forced to turn around. And that upset President Lincoln, so he decided to send down 2 more resupply ships, this time with a military escort. And somehow President Jefferson Davis of the South got wind of that plan. He knew he could not allow the fort to be resupplied. So on April 12th of 1861, at 4:30 in the morning, he gave the order. And the first shot of the Civil War was fired from Fort Johnson at Fort Sumter. And this first shot was a signal mortar, and it exploded over the parade grounds of Fort Sumter, lit up the sky in the area, and it signaled to all the other Confederate forts and batteries in the area to begin the battle. Now, Fort Sumter didn't actually fire a shot in its own defense until daybreak at about 6:30 in the morning, 2 hours later after the battle began. I guess Major Robert Anderson wanted to be able to better visualize the targets he was aiming at, and also possibly try to get confirmation that he had orders to return fire. Now, this first battle only lasted about 35 hours. There were about 4,000 shells fired back and forth, and if you can believe it, no one was killed. But they did manage to blow up part of the inside of the fort and the remainder of the food supplies that were stored out there. So Major Robert Anderson was forced to lower the Stars and Stripes and raise the white flag of surrender. Now, at that time, the local Confederate troops allowed him to have full military honors upon his surrender. There was a 100-cannon salute, and during that 100-cannon salute, one of the cannons prematurely discharged and killed a Private Daniel Hugh, and he's the only person who was actually buried out there on the parade grounds of Fort Sumter. Now, later on in the war, the Union Navy had a very successful blockade of the Charleston Harbor, and then the Union Army started getting a foothold back in this area over on Morris Island, which is once again off to our right where you see them. Now, one of the regiments that helped us get a foothold over there on Morris Island was the Massachusetts 54th. This is a very famous regiment in the Civil War. They were one of the earliest all African-American regiments in the Civil War, and they were depicted in the movie Glory, if you've ever seen that, with Matthew Broderick and Denzel Washington. They got involved in a battle over there on Morris Island known as the Battle for Fort Wagner. Now, unfortunately, Fort Wagner has been completely retaken by the sea, so there is nothing of it left to be seen over there on Morris Island. But thanks to the Massachusetts 54th, and soon following that, Sherman's famous March to the Sea, we were able to get a foothold in here by land and sea. And then we started shelling the heck out of Fort Sumter in an attempt to retake this fort. Now, the Union Army and Navy fired about 40,000 shells at this fort in an attempt to retake it, which is why the fort is only 1 story right now instead of the 3 stories high it was at the beginning of the Civil War. Now, militarily, the Union Army and Navy was able to retake this fort back in late February of 1865, but the official celebration for the retaking of the fort did not occur until April 14th of 1865. They invited a lot of dignitaries down from all over the country to come down and celebrate the retaking of Fort Sumter. They brought Major Robert Anderson out of retirement to come down here and celebrate the retaking of the fort. They even invited President Lincoln to come down here to celebrate the retaking of Fort Sumter, but he instead decided to attend a play at the Ford Theater that night where he was assassinated. So had President Lincoln come down here and partied with us, history might have been written a lot differently. All right, so a few things to notice about the fort here as we get up a little bit closer. First of all, that black structure in the center of the fort was not there during the Civil War. That's called Battery Huger, and that was placed there during the Spanish-American War in 1898, along with 2 additional 12-inch guns. If you look at the flagpole, about 1/3 of the way up the flagpole, you're going to see a stripe painted around the flagpole. That indicates the original height of the fort when it was 3 stories high. Those white squares around the base of the fort are the original cannon ports. They have been bricked in now to protect the fort from the elements, but you just kind of have to picture this fort as 3 stories high with those cannon ports on all 3 levels. Alrighty, guys. So now's a good time to kind of get your cameras out, start getting ready to take pictures of the fort. I'm only going to be able to maintain this course for about another 30 seconds, and that's because it gets extremely shallow behind the fort. So at that point, I will have to make a sharp left-hand turn. If you don't feel like you have enough time to get pictures of the fort here, you can always wander towards the back of the boat, because the back of the boat is going to be facing the fort even after I make this left-hand turn here in about 20 seconds.